right. This is it. People have been trying to get me to do podcasts for so long. And everyone, for whatever reason, with all the internet stuff, everyone wants to do a podcast, and then they want me to come to their house to do a podcast, and I just never do it. Like, I can't tell you how many people are like, oh, you do my podcast, you're going to have such great stories. And, of course, I'm like, I'm not going to drive to someone's house and do a podcast. But you're smart.
Hey, man. Get you in your natural habitat,
That's right, man. As you well know. Keep it while I'm still wearing my sweatpants,
Yeah, hell yeah. This is just a selfish way for me to get to talk to you about music a little bit,
Hey, by the way, I heard you gave me a big compliment in Mojo magazine, but then there's no magazine stores anywhere, so I can't find it.
I did, man. I did, but what's funny is I kind of sort of when I said it in the interview, it was kind of like a slight dig too, like kind of just be funny. It didn't quite read like that when she quoted it in the magazine, and I was a little bit worried that you read it and were like, that asshole.
I
just said that because she was asking me about who's been the most influential to me, and I was like, well, to be honest, for me, Stephen Bernstein has changed my life. He changed the way I think about music. He has taught me, kind of everything I know. And she said, well, what does he think about what you're doing now? And I was like, well, he's pissed that I stole all his ideas, and I'm making a career out of it.
So that's hilarious. That's what you should have said. You said that's exactly what I would have said.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought. But for some reason, when I read it, I was like, oh man, the kind of
I know
tongue-in-cheek aspect didn't quite come out. And
the funny thing you should realize about doing interviews is you got to be really careful, because certain things that you can say that are kind of funny when you say them, and then in print are actually totally different. It's like
I know. It was kind of one of those things where they had come to visit for a weekend, so it was
right. Yeah, you get really
by
loose.
That point, I was loose, man.
You get really loose and start saying the truth, but then no, believe me, I haven't seen it yet, but I would totally know what that meant.
Yeah.
Because I've said that to you a million times. But the funny thing is, this guy Barney Hoskins, who wrote this book about Woodstock, which I also need to read, because I guess I have there's a whole section where he interviewed me, because, the funny thing is, even though I never lived in Woodstock, I had so many different, parts of my life in there that I would tell all these different stories, ranging from, Creative Music Studio and to, Carla Bley to Levon. So, but anyway, he's like, oh, man, Matt White gave you a big shout-out in Mojo, and then I went and looked for Mojo and couldn't find it. Oh, well.
So, did Barney Hoskins see it? Is that his song?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Do you know Barney?
That's cool. Yeah, no, I've never met him, but I know who he is. He wrote the book, right? He wrote the band book?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. Ostensibly, we're here to talk about arranging.
Okay. Let's do it.
Which is great. But, so again, it's kind of for me, it's selfish because, I just get asked you questions I would ask you anyway.
Right.
But, I guess for me, having done this, been doing this a while and starting to produce records a little bit more and arrange and that kind of thing. For you, I guess fundamentally, what is arranging to you? It can be so formal and so informal, and it can deal with improvisation, but it can deal, obviously, I think the public perception is that a lot of times it doesn't deal with improvisation at all. What kind of craft is it fundamentally?
Well, it's there's that quote off my first record from Jelly Roll Morton. What did he say? It's like that. I gotta find it. It's Jelly Roll was the one who really made this quote. Let me go find it because my brain doesn't hold it. Much stuff it used to hold. No, it holds so much stuff that it doesn't. Actually, that's not true. It just holds so much stuff it can't find it all. Okay, let's find this quote. What did Jelly Roll say? And I need to find glasses too. Okay. It says, this peculiar form of mathematics and harmonics that was strange to all the world. So it's a form of mathematics and harmonics. So it's and of course harmonics, you can think of that as, harmonics are both something scientific and something mystical, because the harmonics are things found in nature. And so arranging is taking a song and kind of, and a song can mean two things. Is a song something with words, or a song something with a melody, or some combination of the two, So it can either be taking a melody that already exists and like framing it a certain way so the melody is kind of given a certain framework and being seen in a certain light, or if it's the case where it's basically words, it's doing the same thing with words. It's like giving the words a framework to come out, and then, and you're dealing with harmony, rhythm, and sound, and finding a way to complement whatever this piece is, whether it's, words or melody or a combination of the two, and giving it some sort of unique framework. That's what it is to me, at least. I mean, some people obviously don't really care about unique frameworks. They're like, oh, we want that same framework, or the one that was the hit, But my thing is to try to give everything, make it a little different, Again, and because I'm, when I do arrangements, I'm always trying to do it differently, and as part of because it's something for me. It's as much a craft as much as a craft. It's also a path, and you're always trying to find some different view on the path. So you're trying to, for me at least, when arranging, is a chance to try something new. It's like, oh, what happens if we try that? We already know what works. Let's find what else. Let's find what doesn't work or could work.
Yeah. Do you think the idea of arranging or kind of how do you feel like American music intersects with that? Does kind of what we call American music sort of facilitate that, or as arranging and that craft come because of that, or how does that kind of theme fit into the sort of history of what it is?
Well, I mean, I guess you have all these different strands of American music, and what happened was once people started recording things, and once you had radio and records, and people needed to have content basically on the radio and content on records, that's when you need to start to have arrangers. And it could be as simple as someone saying, something like Teddy Wilson taking a Billie Holiday song and saying, not simple, but as clear as, okay, we're going to play this little 4-bar melody, then saxophone, you're going to play 4 bars, and Billie's going to sing the song, clarinet you play behind the 8 bars, and trombone and saxophone play half notes behind the bridge, and then trumpet play muted behind 8 bars, and then we'll do 8 bars out, and that's going to be the song, and that's the arrangement, because basically creating a structure that allows for improvisation, but also gives form. Now you're talking about maybe a vocalist and a couple horns. But once people started having big bands, which was, in the late 20s, or the mid-20s, then you really need to have arrangements to make those big bands work. So you had that, and then once people started having hit songs, vocal songs, with arrangements and orchestras, I mean, and then, I guess really, there's also a strain that I don't know that much about, which is what came from, John Philip Sousa, which was, the not jazz part of American music, which was really big too, and I think that kind of led more to Paul Whiteman, which was what they called, the king of jazz, even though not really what we call jazz, but that was probably some of the first popular music on records with arrangements that, vocals, what they call sweet bands, and those were very arranged. they had the sweet bands and they had the swinging bands, and the sweet bands really, in a sense, came from Paul Whiteman which came from John Philip Sousa, which is kind of an Americanization of European marching music. And so you had that, and then because we had these instruments that people started to use, trumpets and saxophones, and people didn't really have guitars. They had guitars, but they weren't amplified. So the loud instruments were the horns. So those were still the instruments used on records. And then once there was electric guitars, then we had people using electric guitars on records, which were still needed to be arranged in a certain way. Oftentimes, we talked about this before, you listen to things like John Barry 6, the records that John Barry made before he was a film composer. You can really hear that those guys were reading music on guitar.
Right.
As opposed to the way guitar was used in American music, where basically it would be arranged almost the way we were talking about the Teddy Wilson thing, like find your part that's something natural that you would play and do it here and follow these chords.
Right.
That's still, it's all arrangement. The Beatles is all arrangement. Everything you hear is arranged. Nothing is not arranged. That's the whole thing. It's just what arrangement means is different. When you hear something, even though I can't really say because I haven't heard that much of it, but I'm sure if you hear Jay-Z, it's arranged. How else can it happen? Someone's got to arrange it.
Yeah.
But of course that's not arranging real instruments. That's arranging samples and beats and whatnot, and cutting things up so they work. But everything's got to be arranged to make it work. So I guess the idea was that once things became codified, they needed to be arranged. If they were just being improvised, then being played live, then it was okay for things to kind of be a little more amorphous. But once people wanted something to be on a record, it had to have some sort of form. Was that big enough?
Yeah, that's great. Do you think that I guess I remember back in the Fight the Big Bull days, I did I transcribed Thriller for Fight the Big Bull.
Right.
And the best that I could. And
right.
It wasn't a particularly great job. But one thing that I remember realizing or just seeing was that Quincy Jones, there were sort of these structures that come from big band arranging, just
absolutely,
just these kind of patterns and functional, the way songs work to our ears and how they kind of pass through time and when climaxes are and that kind of thing, that were so identical from Count Basie arrangements to Thriller.
Right.
Almost comically so. It's these are so much the same. Do you hear that? Arrangement, kind of as you mentioned, the kind of the archetype of what it means to put organization behind the singer who's singing into a microphone happened in jazz music early on. Do you still see those echoes through kind of early rock and roll in New York and sort of the Atlantic Records stuff, or Motown or the Wrecking Crew
absolutely,
stuff?
Because it's all the same. Plus, it's all often the same musicians. The very first, I think the first songs that had the word "We're Gonna Rock Tonight" were were Noni Harris or Roy Brown or one of those guys like that, and or Good Rockin' Tonight, rock and roll, and those were played by big band musicians. That's who was playing on those records, and in fact, the live shows of who was the guy in Cleveland? Was it not Murray the K? Who was the big guy?
Oh, Wolfman Jack?
No. He would put on all the live rock and roll shows in Cleveland. I'm spaced on his name right now, but he, his whole band was big band guys. They would travel with the big band, and each singer would sing, one song or two songs. Remember that story in the Levon's book about when Bo Diddley played, and and then the band leader would be he only used the horns for the last note, and he didn't tune his guitar because it was just guitar, maracas. The band really was just guitar, maracas, right, and drums. So he didn't have to tune his guitar, and he would say how the saxophone player would be checking whatever the note was, and he'd look at the boys and goes, "It's going to be a sharp one."
Yeah.
So, but like, it was they'd still have that big last note, even if it was just guitar, drums, and maracas. He still had the big band last note, usually like a 9 chord,
Yeah.
one of these like classic big band chords. They'd still use that. And the thing was, so, all the Earth, Wind, and Fire stuff is, P-Funk, all this stuff is related to big band music. It's only when things started moving away from live instruments, moving into hip-hop, that things really changed from this kind of big band structure of arranging to what we have now, which is, basically things that have nothing to do with that. In fact, almost nothing to do with what traditionally people would call music, because it's not even necessarily harmony.
Right.
It's all sonic. I mean, it is harmony, but not harmony as in 1 and 5.
Right.
Right. It's a kind of harmony that's created by having sounds. It's a new kind of harmony that's created by having samples bouncing off each other as opposed to instruments bouncing off each other.
Now, talk to me about this. So, to me, Levon Helm, who you worked with a lot, sort of represents a unique connection across time, where he has connections of the early American music, early rock and roll, sort of pre-Beatles kind of rock and roll.
Like absolutely. Comes from Elvis. Yeah,
Elvis rock and roll, and then obviously had success or played with Bob Dylan, and then had success with the band, and then really his spirit seemed to resonate and still resonates, I think, as a unique voice and as a unique spirit, as a unique music maker, not only as a drummer and a singer, but as someone who represents this like really large swath of America, right, and white music and black music and all of that. And you had a time working with him quite a bit. I know that you could talk for a long time about that, but what did you learn from that, and how was that? And I guess for me, like, there's certain things you only learn by word of mouth and by being next to the people who were next to the people who were next to the people. Right. Did that kind of stuff. What do you take? I mean, big picture or details? Like what did you take from that time?
Well, here's the first thing I like to say. Like, here's how Levon was. Like, the very first time I played with him, I'd never met him, and he hadn't come out from his back room. I'd gotten there early. They'd give me a list of songs that he liked to do, and I had, brought out a box. I tried to transcribe really quickly some of these songs that they said he might do, but they said that he might come out to rehearse, and he never did. So I did a set with Ola Bell, and then he just walked out, and we started playing. And he put out a record called Live at the Ramble Volume 2, and the first song is from that gig. And it's literally, he starts a song none of us have ever played before. We don't know what the song is. We don't know what the key is. I mean, I had heard a version of that song a couple hours ago, but he just starts playing it, and we just did it. And he put it out. It's on a record. It's like, I'd never even met him. I'm on a record, like, I never shook hands with the guy. He didn't even know my name. And that's like the beauty of like trusting musicians' instincts, that like musicians are going to know how to play a song. That's the first thing. It's like, the idea of we know how music goes. We know how to do this. That's the first thing. And then and what that means really with someone like him is, you play the melody. Like, that's what you do. And you play the melody. I remember a funny story. It was like, Levon really liked to, he liked you, unlike, like most people, like, when you take a solo, like an improvised solo as a horn player, you kind of get to do your thing in jazz. You can move the beat around. But with him, because here's the thing Ornette said. Something I've been going to say, but I'm not going to say on the podcast because it's going to be in my book. We have to buy the book to get my take on it. But the quick take on it, which Ornette said, which totally lines up with what I'm going to have in my book, he said, in jazz, the drummer plays with the band. In rock and roll, the band plays with the drummer. Right?
Yeah, that's good.
So, and then in my book you'll see the elaborations on that. But basically, every beat you play when you play with Levon was with him. Even if you're taking a solo, your beat had to hit with his snare drum and cymbal every time. Otherwise, it was like Lily, you'd see it, he'd get physically uncomfortable because we were all just one rhythm machine. That's what makes it kind of rock and roll or funk or something like that.
Yeah.
And there's a funny story. One time, there's this tune that Howard Johnson liked to play, and it had this kind of ascending, very kind of 70s, like ascending chord structure. And somehow I just started doing like, somebody almost describes a Freddie Hubbard thing where you're like, kind of a thing a trumpet does. Like, it's something you would naturally go to with this kind of harmonic movement because it was like, and that's not like on a beat, really. It's just like, and I could just see, and I knew Levon was going to like it, but I couldn't help it. It's just like, I was being pulled there. So I go there, I can like see Levon's like shoulders clench up. And after the show, he says, "Hey, Steve, he goes, when you play all them fast notes and all them short notes, it just sounds like jazz to the people. I need you to play those blues notes." And that's what he really, and the thing I learned from playing with Levon is like, there's no shame in playing the melody. When you're young, or like when I was young, I mean, one of the things we were always trying to do was like break things down, see how far we could stretch them before they break, Yeah. And one thing I learned from playing with Levon is like, hey, there's something beautiful about just playing the melody. You can just, and I think you need to get to a certain age when you can really appreciate that. Just like how beautiful it is just to play the melody. I kind of feel like, I'm finally at that stage in my life. And, from playing all this New Orleans music too, that's another thing, especially with the trumpet, where the trumpet's the trumpet's a melody instrument. So that's one of the things I really learned from Levon. It's just like, hey, there's no shame in playing the melody. That's kind of what we're here to do,
Yeah.
And it's like my late son Rex once said to me. He goes, "Dad, the problem with your music is your endings are too long." He was about in 10th grade. And I said, "Well, Rex, when he maybe been younger, because it was when I was doing the Jazz Standard. I had this Monday night gig.
Yeah.
I said, but when people come hear jazz music, that's what they like. They love to hear like the musicians kind of like searching and finding something new. That's what jazz fans like." And he says, "Yeah, I know that, Dad." He goes, "But 99.9% of people don't care."
That's great.
So, one thing you learn about playing the melody is like kind of everyone cares about that. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like the great, it definitely, when you play the melody, everyone can relate to that. So
that's great. That's great. Here's one last question for you.
Okay.
We got to cut it off. If anybody's listening is going to walk away and put on one record that's curated by Stephen Bernstein to listen to that they might not have heard before, what's it going to be this week? I know that's going to change.
That's a hard one. But right now, right now, know what I would say? I would say put on some Count Basie. Listen to either. I was just listening to that song. I think it's called 920 Special. And it's just so rocking and so swinging and so amazing. And, you know, it's interesting because I was originally like Duke Ellington was like my guy. And it still is. But, man, when you just listen to those Count Basie records, they're just, 920 Special. Listen to Count Basie 920 Special. See if you can find a live version. You know, some from like between like, I guess, you know, late 30s, early 40s version. 920 Special. That's what I would recommend. Let me find the date on the one I was listening to yesterday. Because you said what right now, so like what was I listening to yesterday?
Yeah. What? Yeah.
That's what
I know it changes.
Yesterday I was listening to this and going like, God damn it, man, this is just so rocking, you know. So this is like Count Basie from Mississippi. I would say 38, but let me take a look and see. Let's see what year this is. Oh, no. Oh, yeah, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41. So, let's see what year this actual version is. It's 920 Special, number 17. Yeah, 1941. So, anywhere between the late 30s and very early 40s. And, see what you think.
All right. Thanks, man. This has been a pleasure, personally.
I hope I see you soon, Matt. Now are we off the back? We can just talk for 2 minutes before I go walk the dog?
Yeah.
A Space Bomb production.